The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. Where does reconciliation in British Columbia actually stand today? What's working, what's stalled, and what does the next chapter need to look like? How do we define reconciliation? Asked Dallas Smith, the president and CEO of Nanwakolas Council. In particular, the uncertainty generated by the provincial government is driving away investment in indigenous-led projects. Smith says the tone of reconciliation at the moment is negative. Smith blames the provincial government's handling of DRIPA, the Land Act, Bill 15, and the Cowichan v. Canada court case. When the Premier of the province moved to amend DRIPA, his actions ignited a firestorm of reaction from Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. Add in the federal government's mismanagement of salmon aquaculture and its impact on fish farming, and it's easy to see why tension on both sides of the reconciliation equation is high, says Smith. The BC Salmon Farmers Association estimates the loss of revenue and economic benefits to First Nations is $133 million annually. I invited Dallas Smith of the Nanwakolas Council to join me for a conversation that matters about the future of reconciliation in British Columbia. Dallas, welcome.
Stuart, how are you, my friend?
I'm good. You know, I have to start by telling you my own relationship with the journey that we're on towards reconciliation started long ago, back in the late 1980s during the Gitxsan-Wet'suwet'en land claim. And I was naive, like so many Caucasian or non-Indigenous people, to what had been the history of relations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous. To learn that the Royal Proclamation of 1763 mandated that any country that fell under the rule of law from the Crown in London was to negotiate treaties that then said that treaty, you, this nation, cede ownership to the Crown of the country, and then the country then becomes responsible for you and for the lands. And we didn't do it in British Columbia, other than the 8 or 9 treaties that the Douglas Treaty covered. And then we stopped. And I've since learned that we didn't stop because it was malice on Douglas's part. It was they didn't have the money. The financial responsibility of that fell upon the Hudson's Bay Company, and they just went, well, we can't afford it, so they didn't do it. But it was supposed to be a condition of Confederation.
Yes.
So I went, okay, there's something wrong here, and we got to fix this. But you know, it's an interesting journey. We're kind of lurching around all over the place, and I don't know that there's a general sense of what reconciliation actually looks like. From your perspective, if we get to that point where we can actually say, okay, we're living in harmony now with a joint set of beliefs, understanding, rules, and laws. What does that look like? That's my long preamble, sorry, but it's such an important topic to me.
Well, it is, and it's taken so many jukes and jives over the years. I mean, you talked about the Royal Proclamation, then there's the British North America Act, which sort of defined some of those discussions. And then, like you said, they all just went away for a while after Confederacy. We thought that was going to be part of a main stake in there. We think of some of the things in the 80s around Beach Lake and some of the other stuff where, you know, Elijah Harper played a big role in trying to draw awareness to issues like this.
Boy, did he ever.
Did he? I mean, the feather, like,
yeah.
People still talk about that today.
Yeah. Well, so let's keep on the same path that we're moving along. Well, we then had Haida, we had Silcotin, and we continue to have cases.
Delgamuukw out of Wet'suwet'en.
Delgamuukw out of Wet'suwet'en. They are defining what the relationship is between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, the Crown and First Nations. When we look at the situation right now, what is that legal relationship between a First Nation and the Crown?
Well, it varies community by community, and I think that's part of the challenge is we don't have a structured framework with enough common denominators that we can work from. When BC and Canada started the BC Treaty Commission, we thought that was going to be the vehicle where we started to work some of those things out. But then we saw the Truth and Reconciliation Commission come in and their 94 recommendations and calls to action. And we just sort of started dumping everything on top of it. You know, we had a path forward where First Nations, the province, and the federal government agreed on trying to build a path forward to build certainty. I mean, really, that's the only interest of the Crowns at the day was certainty. It wasn't really about social justice and all those things. But then as those issues became more prevalent, the impacts of residential schools and all the other traumas that my people have faced over the last 300 years, they just started loading it on top of this train. So we had this train that was going to deal with the land question. But then we started to deal with the impacts of residential school survivors, and then it got really emotional, and a lot of really hard feelings got added on top of it, where it just really took away the direction and the meaning of what reconciliation was supposed to start at. We all knew that it was going to take years to figure out how to rekindle and restructure the relationships that we have based on court cases. I mean, if it wasn't for those court cases that you talked about, none of these things would have evolved. But at the same time, there's so many good stories that are leading towards reconciliation that aren't getting, you know, the news and things like that. We have 11 modern day treaties now that are making some nations successful because they've established that working relationship with all levels of government. They even got municipal and local governments figured out in some of these equations now. But unfortunately, I think government sort of tries to solve it all with a piece of legislation from time to time. And I think that's the problem Mr. Eby's gotten in over the last couple of years, starting with the Land Act and DRIPA. I think DRIPA is a powerful tool for a toolbox, but it's not a silver bullet that solves reconciliation. But yet we've all hung our hopes and we've all hung our expectations as society, whether it be native, non-native, industry, environmental, all those sorts of factors, think that this DRIPA was going to be the silver bullet that solved all these problems. And it's really just exasperated them, to be honest.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So do you think that it was an emotional response, rather than saying, here's a legal framework moving forward, that prompted both the province of British Columbia and the federal government to say, okay, we're going to embrace UNDRIP, which is not a legal document. Rather than, do you think that that was really riding on the sentiment of, well, we need to demonstrate across the divide between Indigenous and non-Indigenous that we accept the fact that you have inherent rights. But maybe UNDRIP may not have been like the best vehicle for us to do that.
Well, I think it could have been if there was more framework built into it, but they sort of took the result and ran with the result before they had the path planned out on how to get there. So expectations were never really managed across the board. And really, some First Nations leaders got to take some of the responsibility and accountability for this because of the evolution of social media, it's all about quips and takes, which I love as a witty, flippant guy. I can play that game, but I'm also someone who's been trying to build framework for the last 25, 30 years through the Great Bear Rainforest and other initiatives that I've been involved in that include multi-sector, multi-stakeholder environments. And so when they floated DRIPA in front of us and said, we're going to run with this, there's a handful of us who said, wait, don't yet. I mean, I like it. It's a good direction to start going in. But if you put the destination there without having the map on how you're going to get there, you're just going to wander and meander around and bump into things. And unfortunately, that's been really the result. And then you add in the challenges around the Cowichan decision, and it was just adding fuel on top of the fire. And it's just been, and it goes from the opioid crisis to the rural-urban divide to all kinds of other societal issues, but reconciliation is really bearing the brunt of that. And that's one of the challenges we have is how do we back out of that now? We're in this huge mess where all this stuff has been laid on top of it, trying to ride this little train that was about land certainty, and it's put all these social issues and epidemic issues on top of it, and we don't know how to pick up the sticks and try to get it going again.
Do you think, based on the fact that we had Section 35 in the Canadian Constitution, did we really need DRIPA?
I mean, The result hasn't been better than Section 35. I can honestly state that as someone who deals with referrals and the use of Crown land. Crown land, I use my air quotes since we're on TV. But, you know, as we did business before DRIPA, it hasn't gotten better since the introduction of DRIPA.
Right.
It's really opened some eyes to things that need to be a part of the discussion, but it hasn't made it any easier. In fact, it's probably made it a little bit tougher because because DRIPA's in place, you know, the act is there.
Right.
But the framework that gets us to actually implement it isn't there, and that's what's lacking right now. And the first litmus test for that was the Land Act amendments. And then that got everybody's guard up to a point where everybody's confrontational. We spent years finally working together with the BC Business Council and everybody from Kofi and all these provincial organizations to try to figure out how we could structure these working relationships between First Nations communities, the government, and the user and stakeholder groups who provide the economic engine that runs British Columbia and Canada. And we were starting to make this progress, and then Cowichan and these other DRIPA and these things lined up. Now everybody's so afraid of putting something on the table now that it's gotten very, not quite litigious because it's not quite the lawyers, but everybody's really afraid to do some problem solving now.
Well, I also think about the Interpretation Act when it was added to DRIPA legislation, saying that going forward, like the word must is in there, like it must, and that becomes very, very challenging. Yes. Well, yeah, and it's now created a case where, you know, the mineral explorers are going, hang on a second, I'm not allowed to do this and that because, and it's been overturned because of the Interpretation Act and DRIPA, and that's when the Premier, because he's starting to see the backlash against, you know, the direction that we've been going in, says, okay, we're going to amend DRIPA. Well, that became something that really, I think, exacerbated what's our willingness to find that path that says we're going to work together.
Well, and I've had the opportunity to have a couple discussions with Premier Eby about this, and it's unfortunate that the pressure he's getting from the First Nations Leadership Council, which is a handful of elected, appointed First Nations leaders who are in a position to try find common denominators for all 203 First Nations. So that's a challenge in itself.
Well, because you're talking about 203 diverse First Nations.
And geographically diverse, economically diverse. I mean, you talked about aquaculture. There's, you know, 17 to 18 nations that are interested and involved in aquaculture. There's 110 who appear to be afraid of it, but they're not giving us the room to actually have these discussions. And so the pressure and the political opportunism that's happening at the very elite, at the very top leadership levels is really putting us at a tough position when it comes to getting into the room and getting down to the table, because everybody's so afraid of what's happening up here that we've lost focus of the energy that needs to be put in at the lower levels to create the opportunity to sign off deals and those sorts of things.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So it takes courage. Thomas Isaac, in a panel that we did a couple of years ago, said, you know, you really want to get into the details that are going to allow us to come to what will be resolutions. It's going to take courage to speak the truth on both sides. Are we a little too shy about stepping up and saying this is what has to be worked out?
Definitely, in some of the levels of this discussion, we are. It's easy to pound a table and say, you know what, I don't want to do this. It's a little bit tougher to say, you know what, I'm willing to do this, which leads to the other party saying, well, I'm willing to do this, and then you start getting some mutual meat in the game. You got some mutual, you know, capital involved in the game, but we're not having that discussion where we're talking about solutions jointly at those levels anymore. All those kinds of discussions are really off the table right now. So now we're back down to community by community, trying to work out what's best for our own backyards with the challenges that are happening at the provincial level. And so it's really important that the good work that's being done in small communities like mine, I'm building 100 houses in the next 5 years based on the sustainable development of natural resources. But I also spent 20 years before that helping to protect the Great Bear Rainforest. So we're trying to find that right balance. And so now we've decided that we need an economy. We've always known that, but now we have the tools to try to build it ourselves. But now we're getting up against these bigger ticket discussions that are hogging all the headlines and taking a lot of the energy that's supposed to be proactive, and it's fear-mongering. All sides are really fear-mongering this.
So when it comes to building those 500 homes, are you self-financing, or are you working with lenders and to build out those properties?
So my community, where we traditionally came from in Turner Island, just in the kind of middle of the Johnson Straits, we got our community shut down in the late 60s because it was administratively challenging for the Department of Indian Affairs to manage us as wards of the province, as wards of the federal government. It was challenging for them, so they closed our reserve, and our people dispersed all over the coast. And so for the last 40 years, our leadership team and council, which my father's been hereditary chief since 1982, has vowed to build a community for us to come back home to. But because where we traditionally lived would be so expensive, there's no work, there's no anything, there's no infrastructure out there, we've decided to buy 600 acres in Campbell River.
Buy? As
in
in
we bought
private property?
We bought fee simple land off one of the forest companies.
Wow.
And we actually put a condition in the agreement that if we couldn't get addition to reserve status, so we'd have exclusive jurisdiction over it, that the deal wasn't complete. And so we made the sale, and then we worked with the local nations, because the Campbell River area is not my traditional territory, so we had to work with the 2 local First Nations. We got them to agree that this chunk of parcel of land got to be named Cowichan IR1. And so we have our big reserve is in the middle of somebody else's homelands. But we bought it with our own money.
But it gives you official status?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you bought it, but when it now comes to building those properties...
So right now it's own source revenue. We do have some assistance from CERNAC and Ottawa is helping very little. I mean, each year it gets worse and worse. They sort of committed to helping us build 15 of the first 100 houses, and then it dropped to 7, and then it dropped to 5, and now it's the 5 houses, and then each year we sort of go back on the list to see if there's any surplus dollars. And that's not good enough for my community, so that's why we develop natural resources. That's why I've been fighting aquaculture, as unpopular as it is in some circles. The science has shown that it doesn't have impact to wild salmon. We've done all that work, and so we're comfortable to stand up and say, this is how we're going to develop these resources, and the revenue from those resources is going to be invested right back into healthcare and homes and daycares.
The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you. So I asked the question about the financing because in the hostile or tensions that are existing around reconciliation right now, does it make it more difficult for you to go and secure the funding that you need to be able to build out those homes for your own members?
To a certain extent, yes. We've had to jump through a few extra hoops just because of the uncertainty that's been created. I'm glad that we negotiated our last financing package before the Cowichan decision came down, because it probably would have been that much more challenging. Even though we have A1 credit rating, we have revenue agreements for the next 7 years that are going to ensure our loan and those sorts of things, but it's definitely added a lot of challenges that don't need to be there because of the superficial take that's being taken around reconciliation.
And that concern, or those challenges around securing certainty, financial security, don't exist only in your nation, but with others. And so in my introduction, I said, it's causing challenges for Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike.
Definitely.
And how do we then get to, from your perspective, what's the next most important step that we need to take to be able to say, you know what, when we get through this process, this is what it's going to look like, and everybody then has certainty?
Well, I think we need to down the threatening tools. I don't know if a timeout is in order, but I think everybody needs to go back to their corners for a minute, take a breath, and then start talking about what is the realities on the table. I think there's a lot of whataboutism that started to happen after the Cowichan decision that really caught fire everywhere. My good friend Chief Wayne Sparrow has stood up, I don't know how many times publicly, and said, I'm not interested in your public land.
Hey, that message is not being heard.
But it's not being heard because then one of the lawyers will step and say, wow, there is a possibility that they can maneuver this. Whether they're directed to by the leaders to say that, but that's the kind of crap that's happening. Right. And that's the stuff that's getting into the press. And I go back to the social media side of someone could release even the judgments of the Cowichan decision. people are releasing like one paragraph of the 500 pages of what the decision actually is
from Justice Young.
From Justice Young, and they're trying to say that this is what the reality is, where it's all a package. And so I think the other thing that we need to do, to be honest, Stu, is we need to be a lot clearer and more transparent about where we're trying to get with reconciliation. So many people added on their own subjective agendas to what reconciliation was. And I think we need to go back to the basics. It's almost like when you're renovating your house. Do you take it down to the studs, or do you just take it all down completely and start again? But I think there's been so much work done since the BC Treaty Commission started in the 90s that we don't need a complete tear down. We just need to kind of like, okay, let's clear the air. Let's get rid of all the clutter. There's so much legal clutter in there now.
Well, I think it goes back to what you said earlier. What is our objective? Like, what do we want that to look like? And I think that when you look at, if we create an environment that allows everybody to have their rights protected under law and has access to opportunities that allow every member of every community, indigenous and non-indigenous, to realize their potential, and we're not standing in each other's way saying, well, I'm this and you're that, to me, that is a sense of what reconciliation looks like. We all get to go out and work together to our collective benefit.
Yeah. Well, 100%. And if we all, like I've said before, if we all look after our own backyard and then talk about what's working and what isn't working, you know, it helps dissipate some of the anger and fear that's out there. So I've been happy to see that there has been some progressive voices around this and helping to, you know, you use the rural-urban divide in British Columbia specifically, where it's really a big challenge. All the voting bases in the Lower Mainland and the Fraser Valley, and all the resources and the development that pay for the province come from out of that. But there's so few people who understand that. That's why voices like Mayor Brad West are so refreshing, because here he is in the center of downtown, Lower Mainland, that area that we're talking about, the, you know, the rural-urban divide. And he's saying, hey, I understand that CP Rail and all these places are important because we need to move this stuff across the country. We need to move these things. I don't think the stuff in Alberta and Ottawa are helping, but unfortunately these discussions have to happen. But we need to do a better job of having those discussions and then jointly sharing the outcomes of them. I always think about, it's funny when President Trump has a call with somebody, they always release these, you know, these readouts of the calls. And I almost wish we would do something like that when First Nations leaders are meeting with senior provincial government folks, because each side comes out of these meetings with these completely different ideas of what they're talking about publicly. Right. It's like, what the hell did you meet about?
Right. I know. Well, to me, it is the most important thing that we have to do in this country that we all call home. Because if we don't get to reconciliation, we've got a wound that is not healed.
Yes.
And if it's not healed, then you can't move forward with the greatest possible strength. And I think about a conversation that I had maybe about 10 years ago with Chief Joe Alphonse of the Silcoteen. And he said, you know, there's a lot of great things about this country that I don't want to have go without. Thank you very much. And the most important thing is that we recognize that no one's going away.
Yeah.
So let's work it out.
Let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out. And we're not going to get to a place where everybody's working towards the same objective if it's just butting heads all the time.
Well, definitely. And I think the path to working it out requires some accountability from all the parties. And I think one of the other challenges we're facing right now, when we're hearing the concerns about how big the civil service has grown, both federally and provincially. Since COVID, it was obviously a challenge. And then when people didn't want to work, when people didn't want to go back to work there still, but then we're hiring, and now they're doing these hiring freezes. And one of the challenges we have is, whether it's Premier Eby, whether it's Prime Minister Trudeau before Prime Minister Carney, they make these announcements about a direction that we're going in, but then you sit down with the civil service and they're so risk adverse now.
Right.
You know, they're all learning languages in the local community that they're working in, which I think is great, but that's not helping us solve the problem of getting mine permits working, getting forest cut permits, getting road permits, getting all those things that we've actually agreed on to happen to help the economy. They're still getting stifled in bureaucracy that's almost getting a little subjective. You know, we have land acts, we have these things that tell us within how many calendar days, business days, we need to get decisions made on these things. And there's a large number of First Nations that are trying to meet those, and they're, you know, being very transparent about, okay, well, we need an extra study, or we need to understand the impact of something. So those conversations are happening, but it's not resulting in anything. And that's really a challenge of reconciliation as well, because we're putting this horsepower into it, we're putting this mileage into it, but we're still just spinning our wheels because of the lack of political leadership from all sides.
We're out of time, unfortunately. We can tell it's a complex topic. You know, a few years ago, I had an interesting conversation with Chief Perry Bellegarde when he was the national leader of the Assembly of First Nations. And he said, you know, it's going to get messy. And there's going to be a lot of anger here and there, but we got to keep working our way through it. And I think that that's really the message that we have to say. Do not walk away from this. Let's figure it out, and figure it out together.
Oh, definitely. I mean, as someone who's been in it for 30 years now, I'm glad to see the next generation is ready to take it up.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure we hand it to them at the spot it's at now, so it doesn't recede another 5 years.
Exactly. Thanks, Dallas. I wish that we had a couple more hours to talk about this.
You can come on Res Dog Walkers and we'll finish this conversation.
I'll take you up on that.
There we go. Let's do it, my friend.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
you.